It can be really special when you're pushing yourself through like that last 10K of a marathon and you hit the wall but you somehow manage to get to the finish line and you think like, wow, I did that. If you're working through something really tough in your life or or you have a bad day, it's just really nice to go for a run. And when you're injured and you don't have that, it's really hard. My first marathon actually was accidentally a trail marathon. So I remember arriving. Yeah. I arrived to that start line and I was like, this looks a lot different to what I was thinking it would be. My name's Liz. I am an American living and working in London, but I have a huge passion for running. I started Resiliency In Running podcast in 2020 when I first started distance running and was training for my very first marathon. And everything that's kind of come with Resiliency In Running has kind of transpired since then. But it all started with a podcast because I didn't feel very confident in terms of like sharing my running journey in like a video format yet. So I think podcasting was sort of what I felt most comfortable with. And then since then it's sort of turned into like all of the social media bits and then YouTube as well now. And so it's good. And now I've run 7 marathons and training for my 8th and 9th this year.
Take me all the way back then, because we'll get into kind of the transition between running and then kind of sharing your story a little bit more as well. But what was that initial beginning? Why were those trainers first laced up? What was kind of that initial, that first kind of match lit, if you will?
Yeah, I found myself in 2019 training for my very first half marathon, which was actually the Victoria Park Half in November 2019. And it was the first time that I had truly sort of committed myself to training for something. And it was an old manager of mine that actually, she had run a load of marathons and she kind of said, you run here and there, but you should actually train for something and give it a go. And so I found a random training plan online that would get me to a half marathon distance. And I remember seeing it and thinking, oh my gosh, like there's no way that I can cover these distances. And, but week by week, you kind of build that mileage and shock yourself. And kind of after that, and what kind of then brought me to my first marathon was I found myself suddenly post first half marathon, just running that higher distance every week. And I found myself kind of I felt really addicted to like running 13 miles and I ran it for like 4 weeks following that half. And then there was a weekend following that I thought, maybe I'll go a little bit further. And then I ran 17 miles and it got to a point where people were like, are you training for a marathon? And I wasn't actually signed up for one. So that was kind of like, yeah, I was like, maybe I should probably sign up for one at this point. It might be a good idea.
In terms of like where you are now, because obviously running such a massive part of your life with everything really, kind of the actual discipline of going out and running and also sharing the story with the podcast and everything else that comes along with that. How is running different now from lacing up those trainers back in 2019 for the first time to your relationship with running now? What's kind of the difference?
I feel like for one, I never thought that I could be a fast runner. I think I always just thought like my big bucket list, one of my big bucket list items in that time in 2019 was like, I'd love to run a marathon at some point in my life, but I never really thought of myself as a, I guess, fast runner because I just figured that I didn't really look like a lot of those, like track athletes and people who, you look at people with like a runner's body. And I think that term gets thrown around. And I think nowadays on social media, it's a lot better sort of talked about in the sense that, it's more, if you run, you're a runner and doesn't matter what kind of body you have, I guess. And I think ever since I started getting coached, it's been really incredible to see sort of how much I can push my body and how much faster I can run. But I think as well, it's really pushed me to also kind of look at my relationship with food and how that has sort of like, I guess, also transpired over the years because when I was 15 years old, I was diagnosed with anorexia and I was, just was not in a healthy place. And I used running as a really negative way of, I guess, like almost punishing myself and, punishing myself for eating a certain amount of food. And so I came from a place from really resenting running and resenting things like the treadmill. And I think now to have fallen so in love with running. It's been really incredible, but kind of along the way. And I think having a female coach has played a huge part in just helping me, learn about like different, I guess, like the relationship between food, training, sleep, and everything that kind of goes into it. And it's not just running. It's not just, waking up and lacing up your trainers. It's everything that you do in the week prior, leading up to that long run, for example, and sort of how you then recover and just every element, and learning that it's not just about running, that there's a lot of other elements that are also related.
I think as you get further into it as well, you kind of realize that it's not just that one thing, is it? It's not just running. It's kind of like running's in the middle of a spider diagram, if you will, and there are all these little offshoots, and that is, like you say, fueling your performance, your sleep, your hydration, your strength training. There's kind of all of these other elements, which I think is pretty exciting, because sometimes when you're running might not be going the way that you want it to be going. You can kind of look at all of those extra things and think, am I doing all of those properly? Is that kind of the vibe that you look at as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I have kind of been, I guess, like looking a lot more closely at my training this year and in training for London. I have been, I guess, just kind of more closely assessing whenever runs, for example, don't go well.
Yeah.
Maybe look at the past week and think, okay, maybe where did I fall short? Where did I not really, I guess, put as much effort into? So things like maybe you put sleep on the back burner, and you're not really paying as much attention, or you're not giving yourself and prioritizing that. And sleep makes such a huge difference. And I feel like when I don't get enough sleep, trying to go for even an easy run feels like my body's been hit by a ton of bricks. And if you have underfueled and you haven't maybe like eaten enough carbohydrates that week, that also can play a huge part in whether or not you're able to push yourself and practice those like marathon paces, and like go through those different paces during like an interval session. So it's been really interesting, I guess, to take the focus less out of like, this is the time that I want to run, but more so like looking at other elements of like, there are a myriad of things that are going to help me try and accomplish that goal.
Was there a specific moment where it turned from kind of resenting running to absolutely loving it? Was there a race or a training run, or did somebody say something to you, or was it kind of like a slow transition?
I think throughout like following the eating disorder and sort of getting back into sports, because when I was younger, I played a lot of different sports, played like 10 years of football and volleyball, basketball, all kinds of things, and never really did track and field or anything like that. So I never really saw running as a sport. But I think I found that when I was going to university and grad school, I found that if I needed, just some time to kind of get away from studying, I would go for maybe a few miles run. And I got kind of into a routine where it was like, yeah, I run like really small distances. But then I think in 2019, during that time period, I went through like a big, like sort of breakup situation. And I really just found myself looking to running as like, this is how I guess, like just kind of give myself time to work through, things that are in my head, and kind of, I guess, like working through that from like both the physical and mental standpoint. And I guess running, I've learned from like that point, I learned how it like gives you so much more than just the physical benefits, but it really helps with like endorphins, and it makes you feel so much better. And I think after then I kind of realized, wow, like running is actually really incredible. And even running really long, hard distances, you feel so accomplished after, and it's just like a huge high.
It's the lessons it teaches you as well, isn't it? Like
Hmm.
sometimes I worry about if I'm injured, kind of like how am I going to get through that injury? Because like you, obviously, I use running in a lot of ways to, cope with different things and also balance myself out and also just have something always to aim for. But if you are injured or if you do have to take a break, you still have those lessons that it teaches you on a day-to-day basis, whether that be kind of, looking forward to a goal or discipline or motivation when you don't have motivation. What are those big lessons for you that running's taught you over the years?
I think you alluded to injury there, and I was injured for the first time last year, and I think
Okay.
it made me realize how much I relied on running for, I guess, like that mental element, that mental health element of giving me that space and time throughout the day. But also, like, if you're working through something really tough in your life, or or you have a bad day, it's just really nice to go for a run. And when you're injured and you don't have that, it's really hard. But at the same time, I think for a long time, when I first got into distance running, it was almost kind of, I wouldn't say for the wrong reasons, but I made a joke in like one of my first podcast episodes about like, resiliency in running is about finding the mental and physical resilience in running, but also like, whether you're running for fun or running away from your problems. And I think that sometimes running can be almost like this escape that it provides you, like, okay, like I had a really bad day at work, but at lunch, I'm going to pop out for a run and I can just like physically step away from my desk and escape. Or if you're working through, something in your personal life or your family life, it's almost like, that's going on, but I can now I can leave and I can go out on a run and almost like feel that, like, I guess, like, yeah, mental and
Yeah.
physical escape.
I think, and I don't think I've ever mentioned this before, but like I think that can become an issue as well, though. Like that
Yeah.
can become a bit of a problem if you are using it so far on that way that you're not kind of addressing anything. You're just like, well, look, I know I'm going to feel better if I go and do this thing. But the problem is if you just keep doing that thing, you're not going to have any time to fix whatever else is going on.
Yeah, I feel like there's once a therapist that had told me, like, gave me sort of a physical metaphorical example, and it kind of reminded me of I guess like when I initially got into running. But if you keep running away from something, it's almost like if you keep pushing a physical ball into like a body of water, the further you push it, the harder it's going to come back and slap you in the face. And so it almost feels like, I think during the pandemic, like during that time when a lot of people got into running, was also kind of a time when I felt like I got a time to sort of almost slow down and almost you get like forced to actually face those problems that you've been able to sort of, I guess, just like ignore or, put in the back of your mind because you busy yourself with things like training and running and school or work and, having a social life and things like that. So, yeah.
Why did you decide to start sharing your journey then? Why did the podcast begin? What were the first stages of it?
I think initially I when I got into distance running, I just feel like I didn't see very much about, what does the, I guess, like, entry into distance running look like? And I feel like I didn't see a lot of female athletes talking about like things like, chafing from a long run, or how you run on your period, or whether or not women choose to run on their periods. And I feel like I kind of just wanted to be that voice, but also kind of provide like a genuine perspective of, I'm only just starting out distance running. I've, trained and run my first marathon, and I'm going to keep training and running, but I want to share, the realities of it, the, not so, I guess, like, sexy parts of running that people don't really talk about. And I think it's provided, I guess, like, people who listen to the podcast or follow me almost feel more of a connection because they think, okay, I'm not so alone because, I bled on a long run because I didn't know that my period was coming. And, I've made a video about, that's happened to me. It happened to me at my first triathlon. And it's just like things that are super unexpected when it comes to running or training that I think it's nice to provide a little bit more visibility around and just kind of be very genuine and honest about the journey and show that it's not just like this upwards trajectory, and that it's actually like a bunch of squiggly lines and you're kind of going, you have really high weeks and you have really low weeks as well, but that's kind of just all a part of training.
I think there's been this real shift recently and across social media and across all sorts of media as well, that people that are authentic, people that are truthful, people that are open with their story seem to be getting more connections now than people that maybe are just going, hey, I ran this quick time. Hey, I've just got another PB. Hey, I'm going to go and do this distance. Is that something you've seen as well? Because obviously your community is growing and growing and growing. Are you kind of feeling that kind of build of connections?
Yeah, I'd say that there's been a lot of connections made. I think that it's really funny to kind of I guess, see comments and see people on like Instagram and people who just genuinely care about you and will make comments and but like say really nice things. And I definitely think that there's been a really nice shift towards more, I guess, like genuine storytelling and
Yeah.
sharing of like running and training. But at the same time, I've sort of in the last year seen the flip side of that. And, you know, there can be really negative comments and negative like Reddit threads and, you know, things where people actually don't like that and they want to pick apart at you. And I think that, you know, the more that I am online, I think the more that I'm just learning that that's kind of just a part of being online. But I think also just a part of life in general is that no matter what you do, there's always going to be one person that doesn't agree with you or doesn't like you. Or so I think it's been really nice to kind of grow that community with Resiliency in Running and having our monthly run club and getting to see some familiar faces every month, but also meet some new faces. And so getting that like in person as well as online is really nice.
Somebody said to me once, like, whatever you do, not everybody's going to like you. And yeah, that is so true. And I was like, yeah, I understand what you're saying. But there's still that thing that if somebody says something to you online that you know, you don't deserve, or you feel like you don't deserve, or isn't very nice, it is just kind of within us to focus on that one thing. You could have
Yeah.
100 positive comments, and that one comment that you get, what is that? Why do we do that?
Yeah, it's really hard. And I think the first time I was made aware of like some of, it's like a Reddit thread that specifically targets and hates on female running influencers. And I hate that word even, but just, you know, female athletes that share their running journey online. And I think it's really easy to get swept up in some of those comments and threads. And it sometimes is like you could get like 99 incredible, nice comments, but the one comment that wants to pick you apart is going to be what keeps you up at night. And I think I just try to kind of remind myself of like why I started Resiliency in Running and that it's going to always have a deeper and bigger meaning than any of these comments will always. And I think as well, like the people behind the comments, like they don't know you as
Yeah,
a person, I
exactly.
guess, and they see such a snippet of your life. But at the same time, you know, you hear like about how people who make hate comments are kind of almost like protruding like something that they're maybe struggling with or dealing with. And so they want to push that like insecurity, for example, onto you, and they want to pick apart something about you like physically, or I don't know, just like something that you say and taking it out of context. And so it's something that you can't really control. And so I think I just always try and remind myself that, you know, it's always going to be like much more important to focus on the connections that I do make and, you know, creating my monthly run clubs and meeting with these people every month and, you know, just continuing to foster those connections.
And we've already kind of mentioned about like authenticity online, but no matter how authentic you are online, it's still such a small percentage of your actual life. So
Yeah,
anybody that's kind of ridiculing you or criticizing you, you're seeing maybe 5%, maybe
exactly.
tops.
Yeah.
And you've got all this extra stuff going on that isn't there, and you like don't want to share. So yeah, I think sometimes it is very easy to focus on the negative when there is so much positive out there as well. I want to talk about the marathons because, like you say, you've run a few now and you've got two more coming up. What is it about the marathon distance that for you is so special?
I think it always feels like such an incredible accomplishment. And I think last year I tried my hand at some of the shorter distances, like 10Ks, and I kind of just learned that they weren't for me because the
They
training
hurt.
is
They hurt so bad.
the race day itself hurts so bad, but then like the training is just so horrible and it's painful. So, but I think something that I really love about the marathons is like not only the feeling of accomplishment that you get after them, but I think I've just learned that in order to run a marathon, you have to build so much mental resilience and mental strength, and learning that you kind of build that throughout your training so that on race day you can continue to cheer yourself on. And I always say, like, you know, you'll have all these people, for example, at London Marathon cheering for you, but like at the end of the day, no one's going to keep your two legs going like your own mind. And so you have to have that within yourself to keep yourself going and push yourself forward. And I think like learning about like positive self-talk has been really important and something that my coach has been working on me with, because I think it's really hard when you're trying to run faster, and having the experience now of, doing a couple of marathon training blocks where it's not just, ticking off distances or, doing runs each week. Like I used to do runs where they had no speed work, no fartleks, no intervals, no nothing. And it was just going out for 5, 8 mile runs. And so I think it's easy for me to be really hard on myself during training, but I think I just have to remind myself that, that's not going to help me on race day, and that's, if anything, going to make things worse. But I think, yeah, it's just marathons are incredible, and I think I also got completely swept up into the World Abbott Major sort of desire to get all 6 stars. And I love that, running races can take you to different parts around the world and places around the world. And so, yeah, it's something that I don't really know how I fell into, but I think it was like I ran my first one and then I just couldn't stop ever since.
You're on 3 stars now, right?
Yeah.
Which ones have you done and which ones have you got come to do?
I've done London, Berlin, and Chicago. So I'll need to do New York, Tokyo, and Boston.
And when are those plans? Are they afoot, or is it kind of something? Because it's one of those things, isn't it? Yeah, it's going to be amazing to complete, but also like this part of it's almost the fun of it. This part of it's
Yeah.
like, okay, what am I going to do next? What am I going to do next? And then you'll be at 6, and hopefully they'll have
Yeah.
more, and then be good.
Yeah, I did hear that they've been Sydney
Yeah,
Marathon is sort of in the, I guess, like trial period. So there might be either a seventh, or they'll get rid of one of the American majors. But I just watched my friend Becky complete all 6 at Tokyo, and I can't imagine what that feeling must be like. But I almost like fear for like, okay, what happens after I finish
yeah.
the 6 stars? But yeah, I'm hoping to qualify for Boston. It's been a big goal of mine for a long time. Chicago last fall was sort of my first sort of aim and attempt at it, and I fell short and got 3:32, which is okay. And I think in the moment I was very emotional and frustrated with it, but it wasn't a very good race. So I'm excited to see what I can do at London, and then yeah, I guess I would love to be able to run all of them, but I'm in no sort of rush to do them because I know that a lot of them are, well, I guess most, if not all of them, are incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about race entry, travel, airplanes, hotels, and, London is nice because it's right on our doorstep. But even then, you're always going to still have like the race entry fee and everything, and training isn't cheap. So, yeah, I guess it's something that I'm excited to continue to work at for the 6 star medal, but I'm in no rush at the moment.
I think that's something people probably don't talk about, actually. Kind of that
Yeah.
extra pressure, because there is financial pressure, whether you're, a coached athlete or whether you're having to travel, thousands of miles in some cases to these races. I think sometimes people just think, oh, these people, they like running marathons, they travel about a bit, but that is added pressure on when you're on the start line, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's hard to, you know, try and create these like travel, I guess, like, and do this travel and do so much travel up
Yeah.
into the event. And I feel like last year when we did Chicago, we had gone and flown to see my parents and see family before, and then sort of come to Chicago. And I think it's almost hard sometimes to juggle, I want to, travel and I want to see sights and I want to see friends and people. But at the same time, you have to make sure that you're not walking too much a few days prior and that you're eating enough and that, you're not doing anything too stupid beforehand, because then it's almost like, well, I don't want to like, just wash away like all the training that I've done. But at the same time, I want to enjoy this because it's supposed to be a travel experience in conjunction with a marathon experience.
What was it like? Because you've mentioned a couple of times about being coached, that transition between, doing it yourself and then becoming a coached athlete. How is training different? How are you noticing your performance is different? And is it something you like and would like other people to do as well? Or is it a very kind of personal journey?
I think it's definitely, I think making the decision to get coached was when I realized that I knew that I had more in me, but I just couldn't get there myself. I had like 3 marathons back to back that were like, I think it was like 4:12, 4:11, and 4:10. And it was just like, how am I only improving minute by minute? But I was chasing a sub 4 marathon for such a long time. And so I wanted to make the jump. And I know that there's like a whole sort of financial element to it as well. So with different coaches, you get kind of different pricing and things. But I had heard such good things about Purdue Performance from a couple of my friends. And so I wanted to give it a try. And I feel like it's just really nice to kind of have very personalized training, because something that I didn't know when I was prior looking and finding free plans online from sites like runnersworld.com, I didn't know that most of those plans are actually catered towards men. And so whenever I was doing some of that training, like some of the training would feel incredibly hard and almost like near impossible. And then when I learned that most of it's actually created and made for male athletes, it kind of almost was like, okay, well, maybe I need to, find something that's a bit more personalized and something that works with like my schedule and something that, will balance with like my work-life balance and sort of work and fit for me. And I think having a coach to check in with and sort of talk through different sessions is really helpful when like I might be really frustrated or really confused about my performance. They're able to almost like give you a bit more of insight to it. So like, for example, I ran the RunThrough Battersea 10K recently, and I felt like I went out way too hard, as many people do. And then you just like feel like you don't have anything to give. And she was able to kind of talk me through like the science behind like, your lactate, and like if you go out too hard, then you might like hit a point where your body just feels like you can't go any faster than that, and you're actually running like a minute slower. But it has something to do with like your lactate threshold and like how, I guess, like all of that science works. But like it's really interesting to kind of learn the reasons why I run a certain session a certain way, or if I've like trained a certain way.
In terms of London then, because we can see that 3:32 just behind you. I love that, by
Yeah.
the way. That looks class.
Yeah, it's great.
Obviously, you're going out for sub 3:30s Boston qualifying, is it, for yourself?
Yeah. Our target and our sort of aim that my coach has made is 3:20, because they've now got like a 5-minute buffer for
Right.
qualifying. And so hoping for between 3:20 to 3:25. And I feel like physically it's possible. I think Chicago, I really messed up and sort of did the one thing that they always tell you not to do. And that was I changed my race day or like pre-run breakfast, and it just completely messed up my stomach. And I felt like I couldn't get back throughout the entire race. So it felt pretty uncomfortable for most of the marathon, sort of after the 10K. And so I think if I was able to do a 3:32, having all of that, I'm hoping for the best at London and hoping to Boston qualify.
If you were to tell yourself now that you're going to go and try and run sub 3:20 or 3:20 in London at your first marathon on that start line, like this is what's coming in your future, what do you think kind of past self would say?
I don't think she would believe it. I think, and it's funny because my first marathon actually was accidentally a trail marathon. So I remember
Okay, yeah.
I arrived to that start line and I was like, this looks a lot different to what I was
Yeah.
thinking it would be. But it was like we were in the midst of 2020. And so like the race that I had signed up for got canceled. And so I kind of I signed up for the next thing I could find. Without really reading
It's
into
like, oh
detail.
God, yeah.
Oh, it's a completely different terrain, actually. But yeah, I think I remember doing that, and it was really hard, but I was really happy to finish it. But I kind of knew from that point, like if I kind of do prefer road marathons. So I already had planned in my head, I want to do a road marathon and see what that's like. But I think I've always sort of looked at Boston as like, wow, that's like where a lot of really fast people run, and like you have to be incredibly fast to qualify. And it was always like this almost out of reach feeling that I had of like, maybe I'll get there one day. And I think I've heard that you get faster as you get older, so like maybe once I'm older and some of those later age bracket categories might be more like within reach. And I think it's really exciting to kind of see that I especially last year at Manchester Marathon, I feel like that was probably the best marathon that I've ever run. It was a 28-minute PB, and it was like I was only aiming for sub 4 and got 3:42, and it was just like, this is what, training and just being really smart with training and nutrition and sleep and everything brings. And I think that that was sort of the first time that the fire was lit beneath me, and I just wanted to see like, okay, like what can we do next? So yeah, I'm excited to see how I do at London.
Are you excited to stand on that start line? Are you feeling ready? Because I know we're still what, 7 weeks, is it 7 weeks Sunday or 6 weeks Sunday away?
Yeah.
So how has it been? How's the block been? And kind of where do you go from here to the start line?
Yeah. I think I looked this morning. I have a countdown and it's like 47 days
Oh
from
God,
today. So it
go with
makes
it.
it,
I definitely know
yeah.
you're in a marathon build when you're going to days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did see the London Marathon post, like, I think it was over the weekend, like 50 days out. And I was like, ooh,
Oh
that sounds
God.
a lot worse than like, 2 or 1 month out. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's been going really well. I think it's interesting now that, like, because I feel like when I was training for Chicago last year, it was more like tough, I think. And I found myself really like, I felt really gassed out after sessions. And I never really knew about like, including marathon pace in like a long run, for example. Like I always just used to do long runs easy. And so that was like a new thing that was introduced last year. And so I think last year was more of like learning about new training runs and like sessions that you can do from my coach. And then this year, I think I feel a lot more comfortable in it, and I feel a lot more, I think, confident in myself. And like I think that that's taken time to build. And I think it's really important, like within training, to kind of do that. I think nutrition is always really important to practice as well. So I've been doing that and taking gels when I don't want to during
Yeah.
training runs. So I think it's just taking a lot of like what I've learned last year and practicing it a lot earlier than I usually do, and just making sure that I'm really sort of giving myself the best shot that I can for race day.
We'll finish with this because I feel like I could talk to you for hours, to be honest, Liz. But we'll finish with this one because I know your community that you've built through the podcast and other content you share as well. They will have learned a lot of lessons from you, from the things that you say, from the people that you've talked to, from the things you've learned personally and then shared. But I know from being on this side of things as well, you also learn a lot of things from those people you talk to, from the community. So kind of what are those lessons that you've learned that you hold on to in the everyday?
Yeah, I think I've learned a lot about how, you know, there is, I guess there's like two sides to like sharing and being very genuine with like your running journey online. And I think that I've really learned that like you have to be careful with how you react to certain race events or, running sessions. And I think that I've learned a lot about, there's a lot of people that, watch my training and look up to me. And if I, like, me reacting badly to Chicago Marathon, for example, really can, badly affect someone, or negatively, put in their head that like, oh, a 3:32 marathon is bad. And so I think I sort of have like, that was like sort of the most recent thing, I guess, in terms of like, whenever I'm like, I want to be more careful of like how I talk about training sessions or races. And I don't want to label them as like, oh, that was really bad or that was really slow, because everyone is on their own personal running journey. And I never want them to look at me and like compare themselves in a negative sense. And I want them to look at me more of like, I guess like feeling inspired, or like feeling that like they can connect with me in some sort of way, shape, or form. And I don't want people to kind of come away from Resiliency in Running feeling like they couldn't connect because, I feel like I'm out of touch or something, or like I'm, so focused on like my own runs that I don't even realize that people who watch like an Instagram story, for example, that, I don't want people to think that like, a certain run was labeled as bad because it went at a certain pace or something. And I think paces I try and be careful with, which is funny because I used to feel so insecure about my pace years ago when I was first starting, that I would never share it online. I never had Strava. I never had any of that because I never wanted anyone to know how slow I was going. And I guess like pace is relative to each person. And so I think I've learned that I just want to be more careful and mindful with, I guess, like how I present my training and running online.
But I think as well, this community that you have built are very clued up to on where you've come from. You're very open and honest about, this is where I started, this is why I started, and kind of this is where I am now. And I think that the vast majority of them are going to be hugely inspired rather than thinking like that. But I know it's something that you obviously feel like you might need to be careful with from time to time. And I think that pace thing's a weird thing, isn't it? Because genuinely, I don't think that ever goes away. Like, I think it goes away. You might feel like you want to share it or be proud of a run, or not be so despondent about, all of your runs, just some of them. But you're always going to feel like that, aren't you, about whatever. So at whatever part of your running journey you're at, you're going to feel that in some way. If somebody's listening to this and they're thinking, maybe I want to go and start my own running journey, maybe I want to start this myself, and maybe I could be, going for a Boston qualifying time in a few years' time, what would you say to them?
I would say absolutely. I'd say definitely. I think that anyone can start a running journey, and I think it's something that I think when you look back on can be really inspiring, because I think it's definitely one thing to look up to other runners, and I am incredibly inspired by so many different athletes and runners online that I am lucky enough to call like friends in real life too. But I think as well, I think you can, once you start that running journey, you almost start sort of recording it in some sort of way, whether that's a podcast or online, or if you don't want to, be online, you can be writing in a journal or just keeping like logs yourself. I think it can be really inspiring to look at where you started and sort of, as you're kind of ramping up in your running journey and you start to run races and things, you'll really be able to kind of be appreciative for where you started and how you didn't know as much as you do now, and just how much you can learn in the sport, not only about, I guess, the sport itself, but also you as a person, because I think running is such a, I guess, individual sport, but at the same time you can really, find community with it. But I think, it's really, you really learn how to listen to your body when you're running different paces and when you're running at races and things. And it can be really special when you're pushing yourself through like that last 10K of a marathon and you hit the wall, but you somehow manage to get to the finish line, and you think like, wow, I did that. Like out of my own perseverance and resilience, like I pushed myself mentally and physically to get to the finish line.